Thank you, Dr. Pratt. As we all know, the vehicles coming off of assembly lines today are the safest that have ever been built. But last year, more than 100 Americans died every day on our roads, and the trend lines seem to be going in the wrong direction. Our next panel is going to talk about that and about all of the other factors that go into improving road safety. Jane Terry of the National Safety Council will take us through a conversation on the best way to get new safety technologies onto our roads. Jane?
Thank you, John, for that introduction. I'm Jane Terry with the National Safety Council, and I'm pleased to be with you today to lead a great discussion, Safety Never Satisfied. We've got a great panel for this discussion today. This conversation is definitely needed as we've been seeing increasing fatalities on our roadways, even with fewer vehicle miles traveled. So for the next 30 minutes, we will discuss the work to facilitate and improve roadway safety through vehicle safety advancements. As we know, safety features have been integrated into vehicles today through different avenues, including legislation, regulation, voluntary agreements, market decisions, and more. Consumer awareness and understanding of and demand for these safety features are key components of fleet integration, leading to the broader safety benefits of these technologies. As technology is advancing at a faster pace than it has before, safety must be prioritized for people both inside and outside the vehicle. And we have the panel to help us understand how this all fits together to meet our shared goal of zero fatalities. So today we have Desi Oikashevich. She is the Global Director of Ford's Global Automotive Safety Engineering Office, where she is responsible for all current and future safety programs and strategy, corporate rulemaking, advanced strategy development, field service actions, and program safety compliance. She currently serves on the board of ITS America and the Transportation Improvement Association. David Harkey is the president of the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety and the Highway Loss Data Institute, which works to reduce deaths, injuries, and property damage from motor vehicle crashes through research, evaluation, and education of consumers, policymakers, and safety professionals. Before taking the helm at IIHS and Hildy, Dr. Harkey led the University of North Carolina Highway Safety Research Center for 11 years. And Ram Iyer is the Senior Vice President of Connectivity at Harman. Ram is focused on creating new products and solutions in 5G Edge, vehicle-to-everything cloud, and AI-based connectivity bots that power some well-known providers, as well as fast-growing startups in the automotive, logistics, and ride-sharing industries. At Harman, he and his team are instrumental in shaping the next generation vehicle experiences in autonomy and connected safety using edge infrastructure services. So with those introductions, let's jump right into the discussion. I'll kick things off here today. In full disclosure, my previous role before the National Safety Council was at NTSB, and they've been involved here recently in investigating some high-profile crashes that may impact consumer confidence around some of these safety technologies. So how can we increase consumer education in a manner that ensures understanding of the vehicle technology, its limitations, and its appropriate use? David, do you want to start us off on this one?
Sure, Jane. Thank you for the question. I think this is one of the real important questions as we move forward. Right? We're going to get more technology into vehicles. People are going to get more comfortable with it over time. But one of the things that we found, and at least in the early days of driving assistance systems and our look at the challenges we face, is consumers don't really understand what some of these systems can do. They're all slightly different from the various automakers in terms of the way they work. they have different levels of confidence in these systems at times. And so one of the things that I think we have to figure out is how do we better educate that consumer, as you said. And I think that the dealerships are going to have to play a huge role in this, to try and figure out how to educate, at least for the new car market. Try to educate consumers on what these systems can do, and most importantly, what they cannot do. I think that's one of the things that we've seen in some of the crashes. So I think that's a place we have to start. I don't think we have all the answers as to how that has to be done, but from some of the research that we've conducted when we've gone out to dealerships, it's very clear that I think the auto industry can play a huge role in this. I think they have to be a big player to help transition what these systems do down to the dealerships, and then the dealerships can educate the consumer.
Does anybody else want to add to that?
I can go. First of all, thank you, Jane, and thank you to the organizers of Autos 2050 for enabling this very important conversation. And just building on what David said, we're at a great place of inflection. We have the ability from a tool set or a technology to help foster a safer, smarter, greener, and more connected mobility ecosystem. And the journey is upon us. But a key piece of this is not only consumer knowledge of the technology and acceptance, but it's also how they manage the subsystem and how they understand the role that they play. At Ford, we're really prioritizing communicating the information to our customers so they know how to use the subsystem. We recognize that the advanced driver assist technologies are going to continue to foster and safety as an enabler. But we also recognize that the driver has a role to play, and communicating what the technology's abilities or limitations are is a key piece of this. As an industry, we need to reflect on how we're sharing the technologies and, frankly, simple things like nomenclature. It's very important that as we create taglines, to me, if you reflect on taglines, we can all connect with Nike, just do it. This is not a tagline when we're trying to introduce a technology. If we go forth and use terms like automated, we need to recognize that the average consumer will think the system is automated. And in order to build on that trust, we need to be crisp with how the technology is defined, but continue to reinforce the role that the driver plays. And I think that this is going to be a key piece of it. Obviously, as an industry, making the technologies intuitive and easy to operate is something that at Ford we pride ourselves upon. We spend a lot of times and hundreds of miles on the road collecting data from average consumers of various demographics that says, do they understand the technology? Did they use it correctly? Or do they turn it off because it becomes a nuisance? And all of those things, Jane, we feel are going to play into how these technologies are used and deployed across.
Ram, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. Thanks, Jane. So one of the areas that interests me is to also identify, or rather devise solutions in a way where some of these things can address the diversity that exists today in the market. On one side, you see diverse set of vehicles. The vehicles of yesterday have certain capabilities, but not as much as some of them that have today. And then the direction that the vehicle modernization is undergoing for preparing for the world of tomorrow. The infrastructure is at a different level altogether. And then you also have to understand how the consumers are. They're also diverse. There are the young population that is getting into the cars for the first time, early adopters to some extent, and then there are the old age drivers as well. So how are we going to really devise these solutions in a way where some of these things are inclusive in nature, where we can really bring this the benefits of safety and the safety notifications to the largest set of vehicles, its users, and also by using some of the current state of affairs with respect to what the infrastructure can support today, and so on. And in my mind, mobile use of mobile is actually one of the good ways to start the education early on, because it is one thing that is kind of like penetrated all kinds of segments. I'm not trying to say this is the only way you absorb the solution when you're really behind the wheel, but how we can use mobiles to prepare the consumers for understanding the situations on the road and using that for early access to information from time to time. It's one way to prepare and also increase consumer adoption in absorbing the safety notifications.
Well, thank you for that. And Ram, maybe you can start us off on this next question as well. And it is, what are the most viable tools that can be used to assist in stimulating the identification, investment, and deployment of advanced safety technology and performance?
Yeah. In fact, when you look at it, we have a lot of data with respect to vehicles of yesterday. We have some data through a lot of POCs and trials that have been done to test out the vehicles of tomorrow. But really, when you try to put all these kinds of vehicles together, we, in some fashion, lack quality data. Yeah. And then if you have to devise solutions that can address this diversity, it's not that easy. Yeah. So one thing that we have to find out is what is it that minimum thing that we can start off through testing in the market in real time, which can still address this diversity from vehicles of yesterday to vehicles of today, to also carry on to what the vehicles of tomorrow can actually enjoy on a minimum front. So I would definitely focus on tools that can act as a common point between all these three segments.
David or Desi?
Yeah, I could build on Rob's point. I think the data is a great way to think about how we're going to learn and try to innovate and create moving forward to come up with better solutions. It's always been a problem in road safety, right? We've always talked about data for a very long time. Crash data, roadway data, traffic data, how we integrate those things together. And now we have a lot more data than we've ever had, right? We've got data in vehicles, telematics data that we're trying to link together at times. And linkage of all these data systems is going to be so critical as we move forward. And so I do think that's going to be a really important part. And who owns that data? And how can we have access to it as researchers and as automakers and as tier one suppliers and others who are trying to come up with solutions? Who has access to that data, and how can you make sure that everyone has the ability to use that data to move forward? The other area where, thinking of tools, thinking of processes, one of the areas that we try to facilitate with the work as a global NCAP, new car assessment program. We're one of a dozen around the world. One of the things that we try to do in working with DESI and the other automakers is make sure we have a very good communications dialogue moving forward. It's important for them to understand where we're going as an NCAP program and what we're trying to achieve, kind of lay out a roadmap at times. And it's also really important for us to hear from them about where they're going and what some of the limitations are at times when it comes to technology. So having that open dialogue, that communications channel is really critical for moving things forward in the future.
Maybe I'll go now. Just a couple of thoughts building on both what Ram and David said. I think part of what we need to do as an industry to really propagate deployment at scale of these technologies, I don't think any of us will dispute the benefits. And you kind of started us, Jane, with that perspective on, how do we address the fatalities? And if you think about the data at hand that says, despite the highest propagation of safety technology, we're still seeing increased fatality rates. And we know that the driver has a role in that. And, then frankly, today's vehicles or today's environment, it has the propensity for the driver to become distracted. And as we use tools to help the driver mitigate through the driving task and reinforcing good driving behaviors, whether it's things like lane centering that we offer or lane keeping assist, we need to continue to be able to, one, educate customers, but make the tools available such that they understand what we're able to do and how this promotes the driving experience. At the end of the day, when we partner with, people like David and his team on IIHS safety, top safety picks and protocols, our consumers are really educated. They look to understand what the vehicles provide. And if the messaging, whether it's NCAP or IHS or other forms of third-party assessment, is consistent and consistently helping consumers navigate through that, I think that's a rich data set. At the end of the day, as we look at broad scale deployment, we need to continue to work with our governments. Currently, if you think about our journey to autonomous vehicles, the ultimate driver assist vehicle, we need help from a regulatory framework in the US. Currently, we do not have a regulatory framework which will allow us to deploy at scale. And if we think about those opportunities over time, obviously scale will play a huge part of the safety benefits that we realize in the field.
Well, Desi, you started addressing the next question here, I think. So maybe if you've got some additional thoughts to add, but what are some of those roles for federal and even state governments or NGOs and industry to play in addressing the safety concerns on our roads? And as mentioned, these increasing fatalities.
Great question. And, a hugely complicated question, but I love the way you characterized it. There is a role for the entire industry to play. If we think about where you started us in this conversation today, public education, we need to continue to inform and guide public trust on technologies. We need to deploy technologies in a manner that's not only responsible, but it's inviting for customers to not only desire these technologies, but to demand them, frankly, going forward. If we think about evolution of safety technologies like belts, and unfortunately, as a mom, I'm still not super happy with belt usage, but it's a lot better than it's ever been. And using things like belt minders helps remind people these things. I feel the same way about advanced driver assist technologies and the sensor work that, kind of companies that like ROMs have been able to navigate across gives us high confidence in terms of where it'll go. Partnerships is another key piece of that. I think about the SAE community and the work they've done on the autonomous vehicle framework through the AVSC. Here, they're creating best practices that NHTSA can lean on to look at approach in terms of how to not only deliver long-term rulemaking, but how to manage the deployment of these technologies and how to share the benefits. There's so many other kind of players. If we think about infrastructure and enforcement, states can play a role to help us through mitigating risky driver patterns, frankly, through enforcement. And then broader infrastructure is how do we continue to work with the states and municipalities around connected technology and infrastructure as a whole. Sometimes those basic things like lane markings and signage, those are key in advancing ADAS technologies and frankly implementing them robustly because our sensors use that as key tenets of how it's delivered. I think that there's a wide spectrum of the role that all of us play, and that's why conversations like today are so important as we share these thoughts. And frankly, we invite everybody into the circle. We're at a point of inflection in terms of our journey to autonomous vehicles, and all of us can help to contribute to getting there in a faster way.
Ram or David?
Sure, I can add to that. If you look at it, the transportation industry today is really moving at the pace of a consumer industry with greater connectivity, autonomy, and several evolving capabilities in safety. And while significant advancements have been made in addressing onboard safety through sensors and advanced sensors like camera and radar, and many other sensors that have come in, not much has been done to address how some of these notifications can arrive by harnessing the advantages of connectivity. Yeah. So, in my opinion, safety through connectivity is one unexplored area which can truly address, in some ways, also the diversity, that I was talking about. Because when you think of solutions and when these agencies and departments come together, you really have to take into account all kinds of vehicles, on the road, not just the ones with advanced capabilities, but also the ones that don't have, and as I said, also the diversity of the consumers at large. So how are we going to really address this in an incremental way? Because in order for us to reach that advanced level of safety, we have to start making some baby steps. And I would truly say we need to start small while we still aim for doing bigger things. The advanced capabilities and infrastructure that can match up to what the cars are going to be equipped with in time. And in my opinion, that's one of the best ways in which we can address this collaboratively.
Yeah, kind of building on what Ram and Desi both said, there's so much in here. From this mixed fleet that we're going to be operating in of those vehicles with and without these various technologies for a long period of time. You know, it takes the average car owner now, you know, the average age of a vehicle is pushing 12 years. And so it takes us a long time to turn the fleet over in the US. And so we are going to be operating in this mixed fleet environment for a very long time. And we're going to have to figure out how to deal with that. Add into that, now we're bringing on electric vehicles, where we're going to have to also think about what that means in terms of these vehicles and the additional horsepower they may bring to the market, the additional mass that they're bringing to the market. What does all that mean in terms of safety? So we're going to have to pay attention to all these things moving forward. I think back to your original question, though, about the various roles that different levels of government can bring to this, NGOs can bring to this, the private sector can bring to this. I think Desi's word partnerships, I think this is what a lot of this is going to come down to, is how do we work together to strategically define where we want to go and how we want to get there. And I'm not sure that we have the right road plan in place at the moment. We don't have a roadmap that really kind of lays that out. And I think that's something that we're going to have to work on collectively. I don't think the federal government can do that alone. I don't think industry can do that alone. I don't think groups like us as an independent research center can do that. I think it's going to take everybody sitting at the table and trying to figure out where is it we really want to go and how do we get there. And I'm not sure we're there. I think the Road to Zero Coalition, that the National Safety Council is leading, is helping in that way and trying to direct some of that. But I think this is a huge lift that we got to figure out. But you got to remember, everybody plays their part. You know, the federal government can do its part in terms of rulemaking and regulation and guidance. We can do our part in trying to push the industry on certain safety issues and try to educate consumers, as we were talking about. Implementation is required at the local level and the state level. And so, you know, you've got to get to them when you start talking about infrastructure and connected technologies. So it's a challenge, but I think we're all going to have to come together and put our heads together. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see these dire fatality numbers that we've seen in the last few years. We really haven't made a lot of progress. And as you pointed out in your opening comments, we're certainly going in the wrong direction in the last couple of years.
Well, David, I appreciate the shout out for the Road to Zero Coalition. I think you captured it exactly right, that it really is calling out on everybody who's involved in this whole system to step up and be accountable to try to reduce these numbers and the fatalities. So we talked a little bit about this, but really would appreciate getting into a little bit more. I mean, Desi, David, you both mentioned this, and Ram too, about what are these other components, even external to the vehicle, about like infrastructure, the way we act on our roadways. What are changes that can be implemented there to really work with and work alongside the vehicle technology, these safety technologies on our roadways?
Yeah, I can kick this one off. I think this is something that I've been trying to push now for a while. Is we've seen success in other countries of systems thinking when it comes to road safety and taking a safe systems approach to things. And you mentioned where I was at before I came to the Insurance Institute. I was at the Highway Safety Research Center at UNC. One of the last things that I did there was help set up a national safety center, University Transportation Center, that was focused on this idea of safe systems. And that's made a lot of progress in the last 5-6 years. It's now well known. It's something that is being pushed in a lot of different circles. And I think we're going to actually see some benefits to that pay off. But the idea is, and I think this is what's really important, is we talk about all this technology in vehicles. Technology in vehicles alone are not going to solve this problem. And we've got to look at how the components of infrastructure, human behavior, speeding in particular, emergency response systems, how do all of these things work together in a way? And I always like to use the example when I'm giving talks about, think about a lane departure crash, a runoff road crash, which is often in rural areas can be very horrific in a lot of cases if you strike something like a tree or a utility pole. You know, from the infrastructure side, we've always had the ability to put in like rumble strips, all right, to alert the driver when you run off the road, or put in a paved shoulder to add recovery area, or put in a guardrail if you go too far to keep you from striking an object. We now have in the vehicle, we have lane departure warning systems, and we have lane keeping systems, right? And add to that on the behavior side, we can add do not disturb apps into our phones to prevent drivers from being on their personal devices, mobile devices when they're traveling. So you think about these are all things that you put together and start to think about as a system. They build safety redundancies to prevent these kinds of horrific crashes. And we need to do that across the board. That's the way we need to think about how we're going to address this problem.
Desi, it looked like you had some thoughts there to add.
Yeah, I love the way David characterized it. It's the ecosystem that needs to come together. And it goes back a little bit to Ram, what you talked about in terms of we're going to live in a world that's got mixed tech vehicles. And we need the entire ecosystem to be able to help manage the safety performance. If we think about all those things that David just walked through, some of the most risky outcomes are frankly tied to driving behaviors. And if we think about advanced driver assist technologies will help us mitigate, but then for those vehicles that are in the fleet that are not equipped with those, working with infrastructure to help create those non-technical reminders, deliver the same intent in a mechanical way. And we're going to have to realize our system is going to have both of those, advanced technology and traditional technologies. But working with local and state governments, we need to continue to also increase awareness, educational campaign, and also enforcement campaigns. You know, we have basic technologies in all of our vehicles. David mentioned speeding. You know, we have devices. If you think about technologies that we have at Ford, MyKey, for example, you can speed limit a vehicle, and this is particularly helpful with young drivers or less experienced. It provides them a nudge that says, you know, I'm going to limit it at this. Again, these are tools to help mitigate, but ultimately, when we can integrate connectivity back to how does your vehicle perform. I mean, I love the simple example of, you know, do not disturb. In almost every phone has the capacity to do that. Not a lot of people do that. And if you think about from an enforcement, particularly in the US, we aren't as keen to do that. You know, here it feels like enforcement is further behind. I had the opportunity to live abroad, lived in Germany for 3 years. And I'll tell you, traveling around Europe, enforcement around, you know, poor driving behaviors, it is just a lot more attenuated than it is here. It's not right or wrong. It's how do you use all of those tools to continue to promote goodness. From an industry perspective, we're so excited as we move to full autonomy. The capabilities are wonderful, working with the governments and frankly helping NHTSA navigate. This is the complicated rulemaking space. Eventually, we're going to have to get there so that we can deploy at scale. But in the meantime, you know, through these partnerships, I'm confident that, you know, I'm confident and hopeful in the next couple of years when we meet again, we're going to talk about declining fatalities.
I hope you're right, Desi. And you mentioned just the differences in between the US and Europe. And I remember several years ago renting a car in Europe, and I could set my highest speed I wanted to travel, and the car would not go over that speed. And it really helped keep control of how fast I was driving on the roads there, because they do a lot better job of enforcing the speed limits there. And for sure, speeding is a epidemic in this country, and it results in about 33% of the fatalities on the roads are due to speeding. Ram, did you want to add to that discussion as well?
Yeah, but there's no doubt that developing infrastructure through a very strategic planning is the need of the hour. But at the same time, one has to understand that the automotive industry is matching the consumer industry pace. Yeah. So what is it that we can do minimally to match that that pace? I would say one area that comes to my mind, which happened and a bit more reactively, is tolling. Right. Before the 2020, you would say, tolls were, I would say, 65-35, where 65% were manned, 35% unmanned or automated, right? And post-pandemic, you see pretty much like the largest, ways of managing tolling is unmanned in nature. So that was a bit reactive, right? I mean, and it was of course done to ensure that we were able to address things in the best possible manner during the pandemic. But when such things are possible, what is it that we can do incrementally to drive such changes? So tolling is like one big example that comes to my mind in increasing efficiency on the road, which is a big part of the catastrophe that happens on the road. How about we add more lanes on demand, right? So today, the biggest challenge is once the toll lanes are paved and created, you're not able to add more complexity or to ease out the efficiency on the road. So is there a way we can add more lanes on demand depending on the pattern, the traffic pattern, and so on? And the other areas, of course, adverse weather conditions. It's high time that we introduce the benefits of connectivity to notify the driver and the user, and potentially even drive some form of traction control. Maybe in advanced vehicles, we can do that with automated traction controls. In cars that are semi-equipped with such capabilities, we can still bring about such actions and behaviors. But in cars that are not equipped with such extensive capabilities, at least we can encourage and move the users to start driving such changes to obey and to kind of like also ensure that we respect the safety of others on the road. And maybe that change starts with traction control on toll lanes to begin with. Yeah, so these are some of the things that we can do even today, and it need not wait on rapid infrastructure development, but something that we can start small and grow this incrementally.
Well, thank you all for being part of the discussion today. I've really learned a lot here, and for sure, I'm going to be one of those outliers on the road, as I have a 1983 vehicle in my driveway here, skewing things. But I will certainly make sure to be safe in all the ways I can be in that vehicle and others, and I hope you will too. Thank you for joining us today, and stay safe.